Good morning, and welcome to another weekly edition of our StaySmart newsletter and podcast, brought to you by Viciniti Corporate Housing, where we try to keep you updated on what we see happening in the industry, anything that we think is going to be relevant to you and to your company. It's a beautiful day here in Kansas City, home of the reigning Super Bowl champions. I'm not a Chiefs fan, but if you're interested in finding out on the teams that I root for, feel free to reach out to me. Some great information this week, so I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in. The first one comes from across the pond. The UK government introduced new plans reforming short-term lets, as they refer to short-term rentals in the UK, giving local councils the authority to make regulations around short-term lets, short-term rentals. It's interesting to see kind of like a nationwide ruling put in place. There's not a lot of details around it yet, but it's giving councils the ability to make these reforms. It does talk about a national registry, which I think is interesting because I don't think that's something that we'll see in the U.S. And actually, I don't know if we'll see a nationwide regulation in the U.S. around short-term rentals. So it's interesting to see UK start to put some parameters around short-term lets. Airbnb has come out in support of this, but there are critics. There are some, the Short-Term Accommodation Association came out against it. So kind of interesting to see the pros and cons of the UK's regulations around short-term lets. And then the next article comes about facial recognition in airports. We've talked about this before. I think this is a really interesting article because it talks about TSA and Delta Airlines and their plan to implement this new facial recognition, and how in the US, how this is different from some other countries. Obviously, like China, over 80% of their airports have some sort of facial recognition software in place already. The ACLU is looking at the legality of this, and I think there's some legislation that's going to be put in place. The Traveler Privacy Protection Act is what they're looking at to introduce, and the future of air travel does kind of depend on this, and we'll see where this proceeds from here. And then the next article we have is about a Supreme Court ruling on New York's rent control laws, and actually in favor of the ability to have these rent control laws. I think this is interesting because this is a ruling for New York City, but this really has broader implications because the state of California has a statewide law around this, and we've also seen just recently the state of Washington look at implementing something. The state of Oregon has something where they limit or cap the percentage apartment communities can raise rents. Washington's looking at 7% annually. So I think this is interesting to see. There's a lot of news. Obviously, cost of living in apartment industry is tough. There are some issues there. I don't know if rent control is the answer to it, but it seems like it's still going to be legal moving forward. And then our final article is about Sonder laying off 106 workers, 17% of its workforce. Sonder is a short-term rental company. It's been around since 2014. They went public. It's one of the kind of industry leaders or pioneers in that short-term rental space, but yet it hasn't made a profit yet. It hasn't seen a profitable year yet. So this is wanting it to tighten the belt, but we've seen Sonder do this almost annually so they did it last year in 2022, and so continuing to cut employees and staff. I think this is interesting. I was meeting with a client the other day, and they were asking if I thought I would see more consolidation in the industry. We saw last year Zeus and Front Desk, two other short-term rental companies, go out of business. Sonder's cutting staff again. So I think it'll be interesting to see if we see any more consolidation in the industry, if any other companies, short-term rental operators, go out of business. That's what I'd love to hear from you. What do you guys see happening in the industry, whether it's corporate housing, short-term rentals, relocation? Do you think there's going to be any more consolidation or companies maybe going out of business? That's what I'd love to hear, maybe a little bit more discussion. So please let us know if you have any feedback on that. We'd love to hear your input. Anything else that you'd like to hear us talk about? please let us know. You can reach me here. My contact information is right here. That's what I see transitioning this week. Take care, everyone.